Some people believe that the loudest way to end a relationship is with a screaming match throwing plates across the kitchen and slamming doors until the frame shakes. I used to think that too. I used to believe that anger was the only proper response to a broken heart. But as I stand here in the international terminal of O'Hare Airport, watching the neon signs flicker against the heavy grey Chicago sky, I realize how wrong I was. The loudest way to walk away from someone isn't with noise, it is with complete, absolute silence. I look down at the silver band on my left ring finger. It's a piece of metal that used to represent a promise, a lifetime of late-night conversations, and a future we spent 6 years building from scratch. With a hand that doesn't even shake, I slip the ring off my finger, hold it over the metal trash can next to my boarding gate, and let it go. It drops with a tiny hollow click against the plastic liner, disappearing beneath a pile of discarded coffee cups and boarding pass stubs. There is no tears, no dramatic music, no sense of regret. Just a cold, clean wave of emptiness. It is strange how a life can look so perfect on the outside, while the foundation is already turning to dust beneath your feet. I know many of you watching or listening to this right now have felt that exact same shudder in your chest. You know that specific, sickening feeling when you realize the person sleeping right next to you, the one whose breath rises and falls in the dark, is a complete stranger. If you have ever been there, if you have ever had your trust broken into a million jagged pieces and had to figure out how to breathe through the pain, drop a comment and let me know where you are tuning in from today. It helps to know we aren't alone in these quiet moments. And if you believe that everyone eventually has to face the consequences of the choices they make, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it reminds me that there is life after the wreckage. My name is Gavin. For 6 years, my entire world revolved around Chloe. We met back when we were both scraping by, living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment where the radiator hissed too loudly and the linoleum in the kitchen was peeling at the corners. I was a landscape architect spending my days in the dirt drawing up blueprints for gardens I hoped would outlive me, while Chloe was just starting her climb in a major financial consulting firm. Those early years were tough, but they were real. I remember cold November nights when we would share a single bowl of instant ramen, laughing about how we were going to conquer the city together. I doused her in support. When she had a bad day at the office, I had a hot meal waiting. When she doubted herself before a massive presentation, I stayed up until 3 in the morning running through her slides, acting as her audience until she could recite her talking points in her sleep. I loved her with a kind of fierce, unquestioning devotion that leaves a man completely vulnerable. I thought our marriage was a fortress. As Chloe's career took off, our lives shifted. We bought a beautiful historic home in the quiet suburbs just outside Seattle, a place with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees that I personally spent months pruning and shaping. It was a pre-marital asset, a property left to me by my grandfather, but the moment Chloe moved her things in, it became our sanctuary. Or so I thought. With her promotion to senior consultant came longer hours, sudden business trips to New York, and a new circle of friends who spoke in corporate buzzwords and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Among those names was Beckett, the regional vice president of her firm. Whenever Chloe spoke about Beckett, her voice carried a sharp, intense admiration. He was a man of immense wealth, a high flyer who owned a penthouse overlooking the harbor and drove an imported sports car. I never felt jealous. I trusted my wife implicitly. When she told me she had to stay late to fix a spreadsheet for Beckett, I would drive down to her office building at midnight just to leave a thermal mug of hot coffee with the security guard at the front desk, making sure she knew someone was waiting for us at home. The human mind has a remarkable ability to ignore the smell of smoke until the flames are already licking at the bedroom door. Looking back, the signs were there for months. It was the way she started setting her phone face down on the dining table, a subtle, defensive movement that became a habit. It was the way she would suddenly walk out into the hallway to answer a call, her voice dropping to a low, breathless murmur that stopped the moment she noticed my shadow in the doorway. It was the chill that settled into our bed a distance that had nothing to do with physical space and everything to do with a total withdrawal of affection. When I tried to hold her hand while we watched a movie, her fingers would remain limp, slipping away after a few seconds to adjust a cushion or check her screen. When I asked her how she was doing, she would give me short, hollow answers like, "Just stressed with the corporate accounts, Gavin. You wouldn't understand the pressure." I swallowed my doubts. I told myself that marriage has seasons, that stress does strange things to people, and that my job was to be her rock, no matter how cold she became. But the truth has a way of leaking out through the cracks of a perfect facade. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in late September. Chloe had rushed out of the house to attend what she called an emergency strategy dinner with a prospective client, leaving her personal iPad sitting on the coffee table in the living room. It was an older device, one we rarely used except for streaming music while cooking, but it was still synchronized to her personal Apple ID. I was sitting on the sofa, a sketch pad on my lap, trying to design a stone patio for a client when the screen of the iPad lit up with a notification, then another and another. The chime was persistent, a rapid, aggressive succession of sounds that broke the quiet of the empty house. I leaned forward, intending to simply flip the device over to stop the noise, but my eyes caught the name on the lock screen. Beckett. The first preview message was brief, but it hit me like a physical blow to the sternum, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. "The hotel room is booked for next weekend in Miami. Tell Gavin it's a regional compliance conference." My hand hovered over the glass screen for what felt like an eternity. The room around me seemed to tilt, the familiar walls of my home suddenly shifting into sharp, unrecognizable shapes. My heart didn't race. It seemed to stop entirely, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in my ears. With a finger that felt heavy as lead, I unlocked the device. The message thread opened, revealing a digital archive of a betrayal so calculated, so casual, that it made my skin turn ice cold. I sat there for 3 hours, scrolling through months of conversations. I read texts that detailed private weekend getaways, expensive gifts Beckett had purchased for her, and jokes they shared at my expense. Chloe had described me to him as sweet but simple, a man who was content with his dirt and his trees, someone who didn't possess the drive or the sophistication to match her ambition. She spoke about our marriage as if it were a minor inconvenience, a chore she had to manage between her real life with him. The messages were explicit, filled with an intimacy she hadn't shown me in years, complete with photos taken in hotel rooms while I was at home keeping the dinner warm. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was intellectual. They had mapped out her career trajectory around their affair using company resources to fund their trysts, laughing about how clueless I was whenever I packed her lunch or left coffee for her at the front desk. Every single doubt I had suppressed over the past year crystallized into a terrifying, undeniable reality. The woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed my own financial security to support, had hollowed out our life from the inside, leaving nothing but an empty shell. A strange thing happens when a man reaches the absolute bottom of despair. The pain becomes so intense that it loops around and becomes a cold, crystalline focus. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the iPad against the wall. I didn't paste the screenshots on social media or call her phone to scream down the line. I knew exactly what would happen if I confronted her right then. She would cry, she would apologize, she would blame the stress, or she would turn it around and call me paranoid. She would hire a clever divorce lawyer, spin a narrative to our friends, and try to take half of everything I had worked for, including the house that belonged to my grandfather. She expected a reaction. She expected me to be the emotional, broken husband who begs for answers. As I sat there in the dim light of the living room watching the rain beat against the window pane, a profound stillness settled over me. I looked at the photos of us on the mantelpiece, our smiling faces from our wedding day, and I realized that the woman in those pictures was dead. The person coming home tonight was a predator wearing her skin. And you don't fight a predator with anger, you fight them with strategy. I closed the messaging app, wiped my fingerprints off the screen of the iPad, and set it exactly back where she had left it, down to the millimeter. When Chloe returned home around midnight smelling faintly of expensive perfume and high-end steak, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, just like I always did. She looked at me, a momentary flash of guilt or suspicion crossing her eyes before she replaced it with her usual mask of exhaustion. "Hey," she murmured, tossing her designer bag onto the counter. "The dinner ran so late. Those corporate clients are exhausting. I'm just going to go straight to bed." "I understand," I said, my voice steady, my tone perfectly warm. "You work so hard for us, Chloe. Go get some rest. I'll clear up down here." She smiled, a small, patronizing curl of her lips, and walked upstairs, completely convinced that her secret was safe, that her simple husband was still safely tucked away in his ignorance. I watched her retreat, listening to her footsteps on the hardwood stairs, and in that moment the trap was set. I washed my tea mug, wiped down the counter, and sat down with a blank legal pad. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I began to draft the blueprint for a disappearance, so absolute, a retaliation so complete that she would never see it coming until the ground opened up beneath her feet. The first step required a level of emotional discipline I didn't know I possessed. For the next 3 weeks I wore a mask, every single second I was in her presence. I woke up early, made her breakfast, and kissed her on the cheek before she left for work. I listened to her complain about office politics, and when she mentioned Beckett's name, my face remained perfectly neutral, my pulse steady. I became the most attentive, adoring husband she could have ever asked for. I wanted her to feel completely secure. I wanted her to believe that her double life was working flawlessly, that she had successfully achieved the ultimate balance of security and excitement. The more comfortable she became, the less vigilant she would be. During the day, while she was at her corporate office building downtown, I began the process of dismantling our shared life piece by invisible piece. It started with the house. Because the property had been inherited by me prior to our marriage and the deed was solely in my name, Chloe had no legal claim to it under our state's specific property laws, provided I hadn't commingled the funds. I reached out to a private real estate investment firm that specialized in quick, all-cash transactions for high-end properties. I told them I needed a discreet fast sale due to an unexpected international relocation. Within days, an inspector came out while Chloe was away on another business trip with Beckett. The firm offered me a cash sum that was slightly below market value, but it was immediate, untraceable by her, and completely confidential. I accepted the offer, signing the preliminary contracts with a condition that the closing date and the physical transfer of the property would take place exactly 1 month later. Next came the finances. Over the years, we had maintained a joint savings account where we deposited funds for future travel and home renovations. However, the vast majority of the capital in that account had come from my independent design contracts. I began systematically withdrawing small, unnoticeable amounts of cash every few days, moving the money into a newly established private account at an international banking institution that had no footprint in the United States. I cancelled our joint credit cards one by one, calling the banks to report that we were streamlining our accounts due to a change in our financial planning, leaving only a single corporate card that was tied directly to her company expenses and her personal credit line. I carefully shifted the liability of our outstanding shared debts onto accounts that were legally tied to her income, ensuring that when the dust cleared, the financial burden would rest entirely on her shoulders. It was a strange, solitary existence. I was living in a house that was already sold, sleeping next to a woman who was already gone, and packing a life into boxes that didn't exist yet. Every object in our home became a ghost. The sofa we chose, together the dining table I spent 3 weekends sanding and staining the paintings on the walls. They were all liquidated in my mind, converted into numbers on a ledger that she couldn't see. Chloe noticed nothing. She was too consumed by her texts, with Beckett too busy planning her secret trysts too infatuated with the thrill of her own deception to notice the subtle shift in the air. She took my increased affection as a sign of my growing compliance, a proof that she had me completely tamed. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset through the trees, she leaned her head against my shoulder and sighed. "You're so good to me, Gavin," she said, her voice dripping with a casual, unearned tenderness. "I don't know what I'd do without you here to keep things steady." I reached out gently, stroking her hair, my eyes fixed on the horizon where the light was dying behind the mountains. "I'll always make sure you get exactly what you deserve, Chloe," I whispered. She let out a soft, contented hum, completely missing the ice in my words, completely unaware that the countdown had already reached its final sequence. The next morning, I initiated the grand finale of the illusion. While she was getting dressed for work, I walked into the bedroom holding a glossy folder, a brilliant smile plastered across my face. I handed it to her, watching her eyes widen as she took in the colourful brochures inside. "What is this?" she asked, looking up from the images of white sand beaches and luxury villas. "It's a surprise," I said, leaning against the dresser, keeping my tone light and full of excitement. "You've been under so much pressure at the office lately, dealing with those massive corporate accounts, so I used some of my project bonuses to book us an all-expenses-paid 2-week luxury vacation to a private resort in Maui. Just you and me, no laptops, no work calls, no distractions. A chance for us to completely reconnect." Chloe stared at the brochures, a momentary conflict flitting across her expression. I knew what she was thinking. 2 weeks away meant 2 weeks without seeing Beckett, 2 weeks away from her thrilling secret life. But a luxury trip to Hawaii was something she couldn't refuse without looking suspicious, and it perfectly appealed to her vanity. "Gavin." "This is incredible," she said, her smile turning bright, her corporate calculations clicking into place. "Are you sure we can afford this right now?" "Don't worry about the money," I replied, stepping forward to pull her into a hug, burying my face in her shoulder so she couldn't see the sudden, sharp narrowing of my eyes. "Everything is taken care of. Every single detail has been planned out perfectly. You just need to pack your best dresses and let me handle the rest." She wrapped her arms around my waist, laughing softly. "You really are amazing. When do we leave?" 3 weeks, I said against her skin. "We fly out on the 24th. The 24th was exactly 3 days after the final closing date on our house sale. The buyer had agreed to let me maintain possession until the exact morning of our departure, allowing me to keep the house fully furnished so Chloe wouldn't suspect a thing. To her, it was a dream vacation. To me, it was the execution window. The remaining weeks passed in a blur of double lives and hidden movements every afternoon. While Chloe was at her desk, downtown professional movers would arrive at our home in a plain, unmarked van. I had rented a private climate-controlled storage unit under a corporate pseudonym where I sent my personal belongings, my grandfather's tools, my design journals, and the few sentimental items that still mattered to me. I sold our secondary vehicle to a local dealership for cash, telling Chloe it was in the shop for a major transmission overhaul that would take a few weeks to complete. I transferred my professional license to an international firm based in London, a company that had been trying to recruit me for over a year, and had finally offered me a position as a senior consultant with a full relocation package. My visa was approved, my flight from Hawaii to Heathrow was booked, and my new apartment in Kensington was secured. I was erasing myself from her world while standing right in front of her. I watched her pack her suitcases for Maui, selecting her favorite resort wear, laughing and joking about the dinners we would have and the beaches we would walk on. She even called Beckett while I was downstairs, her voice muffled through the ceiling as she assured him that 2 weeks away would pass quickly and that she would return to him even more available than before. I stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, listening to the floorboards creak above me, feeling a sense of absolute detachment. The pain had long since burned out, leaving behind a cold, mechanical precision. On the final night before our flight, the house was entirely empty of my spirit, though the furniture still remained to maintain the illusion for her. We stood together in the bedroom, zip-tying our luggage, checking our passports, and ensuring our boarding passes were downloaded onto our phones. Chloe looked around our bedroom, her eyes lingering on the clean lines of the space, completely oblivious to the fact that the legal title to everything she saw now belonged to an investment corporation. She turned to me, her face flushed with the excitement of the upcoming trip, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Tomorrow morning we're finally leaving all this stress behind," she murmured, her voice soft with a manufactured romance. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, feeling the familiar texture of her fingers, the same fingers that had typed those agonizing messages to another man on our living room sofa. I didn't pull away. I simply looked into her eyes, my expression a perfect, unreadable canvas of devotion, and nodded slowly as the grandfather clock downstairs struck midnight, marking the final hours of the life she thought she owned. The early morning alarm cut through the stillness of our bedroom at 4 o'clock, its metallic ring triggering an instant jolt of adrenaline that swept away any lingering desire for sleep. Chloe stirred beside me, letting out a heavy yawn as she buried her face deeper into the plush pillows, entirely unaware that the countdown clock had officially struck 0. I slid out from beneath the sheets, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor with a soft thud, and walked over to the tall windows overlooking the front yard. Outside, the suburban streets of Seattle were shrouded in a thick, unmoving blanket of dawn fog, swallowing the outlines of the mature oak trees I had spent years maintaining. This was the last time I would ever look at this view, the last time I would breathe the air of the property my grandfather had passed down to me. Yet there was no hesitation in my chest, no sudden urge to reverse my choices. There was only the cold, mechanical reality of the schedule I had created. I walked down the quiet hallway to the bathroom, splashing ice-cold water onto my face to erase the physical exhaustion of a sleepless month. Looking into the mirror, I studied the man staring back at me. To anyone else, I looked like an ordinary, slightly tired husband preparing for a long flight to a tropical paradise with his beautiful wife. But behind my eyes, a silent liquidation was reaching its absolute peak. Every single safety net Chloe believed she possessed had already been cut away, she just hadn't felt the drop yet. I walked back into the bedroom, gently shaking her shoulder to wake her up, keeping my voice dropped to that familiar soothing register she had grown to rely on over our 6 years together. "Time to get up, Chloe," I murmured, offering her a warm mug of black coffee I had brewed downstairs. "The airport shuttle will be here in less than an hour. We don't want to miss our flight." She sat up, rubbing her eyes and smiling as she took the mug from my hands, her fingers brushing against mine without a single hint of suspicion. "You're an angel, Gavin," she mumbled, taking a slow sip. "I honestly don't know how you manage to stay so organized. I feel like my brain is still entirely fried from the corporate accounts this week." I smiled back, a perfect practiced movement of my facial muscles that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't worry about a thing. Today is all about leaving the pressure behind. Just focus on getting ready." Watching her walk into the closet to pick out her travel outfit, a wave of profound detachment washed over me. It was fascinating to observe the human capacity for absolute self-deception. Chloe genuinely believed she was a master of manipulation, a sophisticated corporate climber who had successfully engineered the perfect life. In her mind, she had a loyal, simple husband who ran her errands and kept her home base secure, while simultaneously enjoying the high-powered attention and luxury gifts of an executive like Beckett. She felt completely invincible. She had no idea that her entire sense of security was an illusion I was actively maintaining, a temporary stage set that I was about to dismantle the moment we cleared the runway. The ride to O'Hare Airport passed in a comfortable, easy silence. Chloe spent most of the trip staring at her phone, her thumb flying across the screen in rapid, defensive movements. Even now, with her husband sitting right next to her, she couldn't resist sending a final update to Beckett. I looked out the window of the shuttle, watching the familiar suburban landmarks fade into the grey highway traffic, feeling a profound sense of closure. My 3 large suitcases were safely stowed in the trunk of the vehicle containing every single piece of my physical existence that I hadn't already shipped to London or donated to charity. Chloe's luggage was significantly larger, packed with expensive designer resort wear, jewelry and shoes, possessions she believed she was bringing to a temporary vacation but would soon realize were the only things she had left to her name. By the time we boarded our first-class flight to Maui, the sun had finally broken through the heavy clouds flooding the cabin with a bright, blinding light. As the plane lifted off the ground, tilting sharply as it climbed toward the clouds, Chloe reached across the armrest and squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm, her touch completely familiar, yet it felt as distant as a memory from a different lifetime. "We're finally doing it," she whispered, her voice filled with a genuine excitement that she had manufactured to match the occasion. 2 whole weeks of absolute luxury, just the 2 of us. Just the 2 of us, I echoed, leaning my head back against the leather headrest and closing my eyes. When we arrived at the resort in Maui, the scale of the trap became fully visible. I had spared absolutely no expense using the final remnants of our shared domestic funds to secure an oceanfront villa that sat on a secluded cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The air smelled of salt and tropical flowers, and the sound of the waves crashing against the black volcanic rock below was a constant rhythmic roar. The moment the bellhop closed the door to our suite, Chloe let out a scream of delight, running out onto the private sun deck that stretched over the water. "Gavin, this is insane!" she shouted, turning around to look at me, her face glowing with the kind of superficial happiness that material wealth always brought her. "How did you even manage to get a reservation here? This place is practically impossible to book. I told you I wanted this to be unforgettable," I said, walking out to join her on the deck. Placing my hands on the wooden railing as the warm, tropical breeze whipped through my shirt. "You deserve the absolute best, Chloe. I wanted to make sure you had an experience that would stay with you for the rest of your life." For the first few days of the trip, I played the part of the adoring, subservient husband to absolute perfection. I woke up early to arrange private breakfast platters on our balcony, ordered her favorite chilled white wines by the pool, and escorted her to high-end boutiques where I encouraged her to buy whatever caught her eye. I watched her try on expensive silk dresses, nodding with approval and handing over the single credit card I had left active, the one tied directly to her personal credit line and corporate account. Every single charge she made was another anchor shifting onto her own shoulders, another financial liability she was unknowingly signing for. The psychological contrast of those days was almost intoxicating. To the outside world, to the other wealthy couples lounging by the resort pool, we were the definition of a successful, deeply in love American couple. We laughed over dinner, walked along the white sand beaches at sunset, and shared stories about our early days in Seattle. But inside my mind, a completely separate reality was unfolding. Every time Chloe smiled at me, every time she leaned in to kiss my cheek, I saw the text messages on the iPad screen. I saw her laughing with Beckett about how simple I was, how easily I could be managed with a few sweet words and a fake excuse about corporate dinners. The anger that had threatened to consume me when I first discovered the affair had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating satisfaction. I wasn't just leaving her, I was allowing her to climb to the very highest peak of her own arrogance before the ground vanished beneath her feet. I wanted her to feel completely safe, completely brilliant, completely superior. The higher she climbed, the harder the impact would be when reality finally caught up with her. One afternoon, while Chloe was getting a 4-hour deep tissue massage at the resort's exclusive cliffside spa, I returned to our empty villa. The quiet of the room was heavy, punctured only by the steady hum of the air conditioner and the distant crash of the waves. I pulled out my laptop, connecting to the secure resort network, and initiated a private encrypted call with my real estate representative back in Seattle. "Gavin, glad you called." The agent's voice sounded crisp over the line. "The funds from the investment firm have officially cleared the escrow account. The cash wire has been completed. The property title is now fully transferred to the corporate buyer. As per your instructions, the physical locks on the house will be changed at exactly 9 o'clock on the morning of your scheduled return flight. Excellent, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. Are the utility transfers finalized? Yes, sir. All water, electricity, and internet accounts under your name have been officially scheduled for termination on that same date. The new owner's legal team has already prepared the documentation to take physical possession of the structure the moment the locks are swapped. From a legal standpoint, you no longer own a single square inch of real estate in the state of Washington. Thank you, I replied quietly. And the moving truck? All of your personal items from the storage unit are already in transit to the shipping facility in New Jersey. They will board a container ship heading for the United Kingdom by the end of the week. You're completely clear on this end. I closed the laptop, a profound sense of lightness settling into my chest. I walked over to the small safe in the wall, pulling out my passport and my official employment visa for the United Kingdom. I looked at the stamps, the legal permissions that represented a brand new life waiting for me in a city thousands of miles away. Across an entire ocean. I had no friends in London, no family, no familiar streets to walk on. But I had my self-respect, I had my talent, and most importantly, I had my freedom. When Chloe returned from the spa later that evening, her skin was glowing, her mood incredibly light. She threw her arms around my neck from behind as I sat on the veranda, her breath warm against my ear. I feel like a completely new person, Gavin, she murmured, her voice soft and heavy, with a manufactured affection. This vacation was exactly what we needed. I was so caught up in the stress of the firm, so distant from you. I'm really glad you forced me to take this break. I reached up, placing my hand over hers, feeling the smooth skin of her wrist. I'm glad too, Chloe, I said, turning my head slightly to look at her profile against the darkening sky. Sometimes you have to step completely away from your life to see things clearly. You're right, she agreed, completely missing the double meaning of my words as she stepped away to pour herself a glass of wine. I was actually thinking about the future today. When we get back to Seattle, I want to remodel the kitchen. I saw some amazing marble countertops in a magazine today that would look perfect in our house. I watched the clear liquid pour into her crystal glass, the reflection of the sunset turning the wine a deep blood-red color. We can definitely look into that when we get back, I said softly, my fingers tightening against the wooden armrest of my chair as I watched her take a slow, satisfied sip. The crimson stain of the wine reflected in her glass seemed to linger in the room long after she set it down to head to bed, a vivid reminder of the quiet, bloodless execution currently taking place under the tropical stars. As the second week of our stay in Maui began to bleed into the first few days of November, the island air grew thicker, heavy with the promise of afternoon rainstorms that rolled quickly over the volcanic peaks. I spent those long, humid mornings standing by the edge of our private veranda, tracking the slow progress of cargo ships cutting across the distant horizon. One of those massive steel hulls carried everything that remained of my identity, hauling my grandfather's antique drafting tools, my architectural journals, and my clothes across the world toward the Atlantic. It was a strange sensation to realize that my physical presence in America had been reduced to what could fit inside a few leather cases resting at the foot of our bed. Chloe remained entirely trapped within the golden cage of her own making, completely oblivious to the silent gears grinding beneath her feet. Her mornings followed a predictable, luxurious rhythm. She would spend hours lounging on the poolside daybeds, her eyes locked onto her phone screen while she sipped expensive cocktails billed directly to her personal credit card line. From my vantage point a few yards away, pretending to read a landscaping manual, I could see the familiar frantic motion of her thumbs against the glass. I didn't need to read the screen to know she was messaging Beckett, coordinating her corporate calendar around their upcoming secret trysts back in Seattle, and laughing at how her predictable homebody husband was busy occupying himself with the resort amenities. She looked completely at peace, a woman who truly believed she had conquered the complex art of having it all without paying a single consequence. But the dark reality of what I had set in motion during the weeks prior to our departure was already solidifying back on the mainland. While Chloe was enjoying the warm Pacific sun, the final, irreversible legal papers for our suburban home were being processed through the King County Recorder's Office. The private real estate investment firm had completed their wire transfer, and the cash sat safely tucked away inside my international account in London, untouched by American banking systems. Every single utility bill, from the high-speed internet she used for her late-night work calls to the water system that kept my grandfather's oak trees alive, was scheduled for an immediate hard cut-off at 9 o'clock on the morning of our return flight. I had even contacted the local postal service to officially cancel our mail forwarding, ensuring that any future correspondence, including foreclosure notices or credit statements, would simply bounce back into the void. The most difficult part of the logistics wasn't the property, it was the meticulous shifting of our shared marital liabilities. Over our 6 years together, we had accumulated various joint lines of credit for vehicle maintenance, home goods, and high-end electronics that Chloe insisted on buying to impress her corporate peers. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I had systematically called each financial institution, utilizing the power of attorney she had granted me during our first year of marriage to restructure the primary ownership of those accounts. Because her income as a senior consultant significantly outpaced my landscape design salary on paper, the banks were more than willing to transfer the absolute liabilities solely under her Social Security number and corporate credit profile. I left our joint savings account completely intact, save for the exact amount needed to fund this lavish Hawaiian getaway, ensuring that her personal banking app would still show a comfortable balance right up until the final second of the trap. On our absolute last night in Maui, the atmosphere shifted as a heavy downpour finally broke over the coast, sending torrents of water rushing down the volcanic rock cliffs into the churning ocean below. I had reserved a corner table at the resort's premier oceanside dining room, a spectacular glass-walled structure that hung directly over the crashing surf. Chloe arrived wearing a stunning backless silk dress she had purchased earlier that week, using her corporate-tied card, her hair pinned up, looking every bit the sophisticated executive she aspired to be. The candlelight caught the sharp, angular lines of her face as she looked across the white tablecloth at me, her expression a mix of genuine relaxation and that lingering, patronizing pity she always reserved for my simple nature. "I can't believe it's over tomorrow," she sighed, leaning back against the leather chair as the waiter poured 2 glasses of a vintage Cabernet. "This place has been an absolute dream, Gavin. I'm almost dreading going back to the grey weather in Seattle and the endless corporate meetings." "Every journey has to end eventually, Chloe," I replied, my voice smooth, completely devoid of the sharp edge cutting through my chest. "But some endings are just necessary steps towards something entirely different. We've spent a lot of time building a specific life, and tonight is about acknowledging exactly where that path has led us." She smiled, raising her glass to meet mine, the crystal letting out a clear, ringing chime that was instantly swallowed by the roar of the thunderstorm outside. "To our future, Gavin, and to always keeping things steady at home." "To the future," I echoed, taking a slow sip of the heavy dark wine, watching her face through the amber glow of the candle. I watched her enjoy her expensive meal, listening to her talk about her upcoming projects with Beckett's division, nodding in all the right places while my internal clock counted down the hours. There was no anger left in my heart, no desire to scream the truth across the table. There was only a profound, chilling curiosity to see how a person could be so utterly blind to the cliff they were walking toward. The next morning, the reality of the departure sequence took over with a cold, unforgiving speed. We stood in the humid airport terminal at 7 o'clock, surrounded by the chaotic noise of tourists' luggage carts and boarding announcements. I turned to Chloe, holding my small leather carry-on bag, my face twisted into a perfect expression of sudden professional distress that I had practiced for days. "I still can't believe this client emergency happened right now," I said, looking down at a fake text message sequence I had fabricated on my phone screen to simulate a massive design project crisis in New York. The firm is completely panicking over the drainage blueprints for the Manhattan Penthouse project. If I don't catch this early connection through JFK, the entire contract falls through. Chloe looked at me, a flash of mild annoyance crossing her features before she quickly masked it with her usual patronizing sweetness. She was secretly thrilled. My sudden detour to New York meant she would have the entire afternoon flight back to Seattle to herself, giving her 6 uninterrupted hours to text Beckett without worrying about my shadow over her shoulder. "It's okay, honey," she said, reaching up to pat my arm with a casual, dismissive tenderness. "Business is business. You go handle your client in New York and I'll take the direct afternoon flight home. I'll see you at the house tomorrow night, okay?" "The house will be exactly as it's meant to be," I whispered, stepping forward to press a light, lingering kiss onto her forehead. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out a crisp envelope containing $300 in cash, and pressed it into her palm. "Take this for the Uber ride back from the airport tonight. I don't want you worrying about a thing." She smiled, slipping the envelope into her designer purse, completely unaware that it was the only money she now possessed in the world. I turned away without another word, handing my boarding pass to the gate agent and walking down the narrow jet bridge toward the aircraft that would carry me to JFK, where my actual connecting flight to London Heathrow was already waiting on the tarmac. As the heavy metal door of the plane hissed shut behind me, isolating me from the terminal, I took my seat by the window and looked out at the rain-streaked asphalt, watching the ground crew pull away the yellow wheel chocks from the tires. The steady vibration of the jet engine against the cabin wall eventually gave way to a sudden heavy thud as the tires hit the tarmac, signaling the end of the long journey across the Atlantic. While my own aircraft was touching down at Heathrow Airport in London, Chloe's commercial flight was descending through the familiar grey overcast of the Pacific Northwest, bringing her back to the rain-slicked runways of Seattle. She stepped off her plane, feeling completely rested, her skin still carrying the warm glow of the Hawaiian sun, her mind focused on the quiet comfort of the suburban sanctuary she expected to find waiting for her. She collected her massive designer suitcases from the baggage carousel, pulled the cash envelope I had given her out of her purse, and handed a few bills to the rideshare driver who loaded her things into the trunk. As the car tore down the highway toward our quiet neighborhood, she scrolled through her phone, sending a quick text message to Beckett to let him know she had returned safely to reality. The rideshare vehicle pulled into our familiar tree-lined cul-de-sac just as the afternoon light was beginning to fail, casting long dark shadows across the manicurant lawns. But as the car slowed to a halt in front of our driveway, Chloe felt a sudden sharp prickle of confusion tighten against her chest. The garage door was wide open, and parked directly on the asphalt was a massive commercial moving truck with its rear ramp extended. 2 muscular men in heavy work boots were casually carrying a large leather sofa out of the front entrance, while a third man stood near the porch using a power drill to completely dismantle the vintage brass lock set on our front door. Chloe slammed the car door shut, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she marched across the lawn, her voice rising in a sharp wave of corporate authority. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you are doing? This is private property and you need to stop touching my things immediately." The man with the drill stopped working, turning around with a calm, completely unfazed expression that instantly made her blood run cold. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a laminated folder containing a fresh, legally recorded deed of sale bearing the official stamp of King County, and handed it to her. "Ma'am, this property was purchased 4 weeks ago by an institutional investment fund," he explained, pointing to the line at the bottom of the document. The previous owner, Gavin, finalized the all-cash transaction and agreed to a hard vacancy date of today at 9 o'clock in the morning. The locks are being swapped right now, and the house is currently being staged for new tenants. If you have a dispute, you need to call the individual who signed the transfer. Chloe stared at the paper, her eyes locking onto my signature. The familiar, precise handwriting she had seen on 1,000 birthday cards and grocery lists. The document was undeniable. The house that had belonged to my family for 2 generations, the structure she had spent the last week planning to remodel with expensive marble, no longer belonged to us. It was gone, legally wiped off our asset ledger while she was sunbathing in Maui. A frantic blind panic completely took over her senses. She stumbled back onto the sidewalk, her fingers trembling violently as she pulled out her phone to dial my number. The screen lit up, but instead of the familiar ringing tone, a flat automated operator's voice cut through the speaker. "We're sorry, the number you are trying to reach has been permanently disconnected or is no longer in service." She dropped her purse onto the grass, her breath coming in ragged, suffocating gasps as she opened her mobile banking app, desperate to see the numbers that would prove she still had a foothold in reality. But the screen before her was a total wasteland. Her access to our joint savings account had been completely revoked, her name stripped from the master profile. When she checked her personal credit line, she found it completely maxed out to the absolute limit. Burdened by the heavy financial liabilities and vacation expenditures, I had systematically shifted onto her social security number before we left. Her corporate card was frozen flagged by her firm's compliance department for unauthorized personal luxury charges during her time in Hawaii. In a final desperate bid for survival, she dialed Beckett's private office line, her voice cracking as she prepared to beg her powerful, wealthy lover for a place to stay, for a legal intervention, for anything to stop the sinking feeling in her stomach. The phone rang twice before his assistant answered, her tone cold and professionally distant. "Beckett is currently in an executive board meeting and has explicitly requested that all personal communications from your department be routed directly through human resources," the assistant said flatly. "The firm has recently initiated an internal review regarding corporate travel expenses linked to your regional compliance accounts. He will not be accepting any direct calls from you moving forward." The line went completely dead. Chloe stood alone on the curb, surrounded by her expensive luggage, looking at the empty shell of a house that used to be her home. In a matter of minutes, the entire illusion of her superior, brilliant existence had dissolved into nothingness, leaving her exposed to the cold Seattle rain without a single safety net to catch her fall. Back in London, as I stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air of the United Kingdom, my phone chimed with a notification from an old email account I had left open for one final transmission. It was a delivery confirmation showing that a single video file had been successfully downloaded onto Chloe's personal device. The footage had been recorded in the quiet hours of the JFK terminal right before my international flight took off. In the video, I didn't shout, I didn't insult her, and I didn't display a single ounce of bitterness. I simply looked directly into the camera lens, my voice calm, steady, and light, with the freedom of a man who had finally dropped a heavy burden. "By the time you watch this, Chloe, I'll be on the other side of an ocean, starting a life that you will never be a part of," I said, softly in the recording. I know about the messages on the iPad. I know about Beckett, the hotel rooms, the corporate dinners, and the jokes you shared about how simple and clueless I was. I didn't confront you because you didn't deserve the dignity of an argument. You wanted a life built on deceit and status, so I decided to step completely out of your way and let you have it. The house is sold, the accounts are closed, and the debts you accumulated are now entirely yours to carry. I loved you with everything I had, but I love my own self-respect more. Have a good life with the choices you've made. The screen of my phone went dark, reflecting the bright, unfamiliar lights of the London streets stretching out before me. There is a deep, profound lesson in the wreckage of a broken promise. True empowerment doesn't come from winning a loud, messy fight with someone who never valued your heart. It comes from having the quiet strength to build a wall of absolute silence, walking away cleanly and leaving a toxic person to sit alone inside the empty ruins of their own choices. But it makes you wonder about the thin line between justice and total destruction. Did I handle this situation the right way by erasing our entire existence without a single conversation, or did my silent, absolute exit cross the line into something too. Tan Nan, was Chloe's betrayal deserving of a punishment that completely stripped away her security, or should there always be a final chance to face the person who broke your heart? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to remember their own worth.